Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, rather had fun, yeah.
I think this is actually more stake in this event than people give credit for because this is the first time we've actually tested pickleball in a legitimate arena. We're not ready for, you know, NBA stadiums yet, but this sort of I'm not trying to call it a second tier in terms of size arena. I feel like this is a great testing ground, and I think that's what we are aspiring for with the MLP format. And so, do you feel like we passed the test? Are we going to start looking for centers like this around the country for planning purposes next year? Like, how do you feel about that?
I feel we did as good as we could have for a first go around at this type of event in a pro level arena. And you're right. I mean, what we're fortunate about in Chaifetz Arena is we fit the sweet spot in terms of seating capacity. We're not a United Center or a Madison Square Garden that's going to host 16, 18, 20,000, and we don't want to be. The sport is not there yet. It's getting there. But we did need, larger capacity than, amateur hockey, right? Minor league hockey. Those sorts of venues don't have the production capabilities that Chaifetz does. Chaifetz Arena was actually voted the top arena in the world under 12,000 seats just 5 or 8 short years ago, not only because of the capacity, but because of the location, the production capabilities, and the staff. Look, was it perfect? No. But I think to your point, the first time being in a pro level arena, I give us an A minus in terms of what I expected coming into this and what we were ultimately able to deliver.
Sure. So, what are those items that take you from an A minus to 100% A plus?
Well, I think we learned a lot about seating arrangements. I think we can be a little bit more strategic around how we funnel fans into certain sections to make sure that fans are, first of all, so that we look as good as possible on TV. One of the things we regret is with having that designated or reserved seating, inevitably you leave a little bit of open capacity on certain days because people reserve for 4-day passes and may not attend for the entire event. So we need to think about things like that and how it shows up on TV production. We also need to think about, and this is not just a Chaifetz Arena problem, this is an industry problem. We need to think about how we transition towards a court surface that is temporary or not permanent, but also safe and comfortable for the players to play on. There have been a couple players that commented on the rollout courts, not only at this event at Chaifetz, but in the past. And those are legitimate concerns. I mean, this league is only going to be as good as its players are capable of playing. And the moment we risk any level of injury, even if it's 1%, that's something that we can't afford. So it's a little bit out of our control, Zane, but it's something that the industry really needs to think about longer term. How do we bring safer, more stable, and more comfortable playing surfaces into these pro level arenas? Because this is the direction that the sport needs to go. We need to make sure that we have environments that are comfortable and safe for the players.
Yeah, so you're bringing up a good point, something that Paris actually brought up in her interview against the after they had beaten the previous undefeated Flash. She mentioned that the rollout courts are safe, and I know that unless the Chaifetz group starts making courts as well, like that's kind of out of your control. You're stuck with whatever can be provided. I have actually been a huge proponent of rollout courts because I think they allow us to play in places like Central Park and Chaifetz Arena, but I can't deny at this point that I think they are, we'll just say it, maybe not dangerous, but there's without doubt more dangerous than the courts that we normally play on. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. I'm just curious, like, what do we do? We don't want to give up venues like Chaifetz, but these courts are more dangerous than your normal outdoor tennis court surface.
Yeah, look, I don't have the perfect answer. I'm not a sports scientist and I'm definitely not a court construction expert. What I will say is, while we are living and breathing this as people in the pickleball industry, it's not unique to pickleball. You think about similar challenges in the NFL and in the MLB where they're kind of alternating between the pros and cons of playing on live grass versus turf. There are
Right.
benefits to each, both in terms of the maintenance and the cost side, and there are risks to each. With certain courts or certain fields versus others, you inevitably have injuries around risks around player injuries. And as athletes get bigger and faster and stronger, arguably regardless of the surface, you see it in the NBA. The court surface hasn't changed at all, and you see an increase in injuries. You see this prominence of Achilles tears with some of the highest level, most prominent athletes. So this is something that is being thought about, frankly, in every major sport. It just so happens that the spotlight is on us in pickleball right now because of the growth of the industry. I don't know what the solution is, but I do love the inroads and the accessibility that these temporary courts give us to test new environments and to test arenas like we were able to do this week. And I think it's a net positive. And with the trial and error of expanding into these some of these new era arenas, you're inevitably going to have a little bit of risk. Our question is, how do we minimize that risk to the lowest amount possible?
Yeah, I feel like the comparison, and this isn't something that I'd thought of before, the comparison between the artificial grass and the turf in the NFL, I feel like is probably the best comparison because players all want to play on the natural grass, and it does seem like there's an uptick in injuries when it comes to playing on the turf, but obviously there's just turf makes it so much easier, millions and millions of dollars easier to maintain. You can assure the same quality consistently with turf versus grass might not be quite as easy. So that's an interesting comparison that you have, and you know, at least we're not having injuries the same level as the NFL, and we'd have some real problems there. Um, but I also wanted to chat with you about the tweets that you had surrounding the Major League Pickleball trade between Ben and or Ben being traded to the Mad Drops. I think from what you mentioned in the follow up, I think your original tweet was not with full context, and so wanted to ask, just for you to say, what do you think about the Ben Johns to the LA Mad Drop transaction?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple levels of that should be addressed. In regards to my tweet or tweets plural, first of all, I admit that the words that I initially used were probably a bit harsh. I apologize for them being, interpreted incorrectly. I didn't mean to convey or accuse any wrongdoing by the league or anyone in particular. I did send a follow-up tweet to attempt to clarify that, not at anybody's request or demand, but just because I thought it was the right thing to do for the league and for our sport was to clarify my intentions there. And before I get into the meaning of that follow up tweet, I think it's important to first say this: there's a big silver lining in all of this. I truly believe that Ben being on the Mad Drops is a good thing for our league and a good thing for the sport. I think it's good that he's on a team that is arguably one of the most storied and historic teams in MLP's short history. They've won championships. They are invested. They're a team with brand, a team that's investing in staff, a team with social presence, and I think they have a true desire to win. So I think Ben being a part of an organization like that will be good for our league, and I think if he's being honest, I think it will increase his competitive desire to win in MLP. And that's good for everybody and that's good for the sport. Um, in regards to my tweets themselves, what I meant to convey and what I really want to clarify is this: it's frustrating for teams like the Shock, the Flash, the Fives, the Sliders, and Brooklyn, who are building competitive rosters through draft processes and trade deadlines that have been set in stone for months, right? We're spending real money on players and we're doing it by the books, right? And these are rules that have really been set since the beginning of the calendar year. So, it's not just us. I think there's a general sentiment. I heard it in the crowds, in the stands. I see it on Twitter. It's among fans, industry, other team owners. There's a general sentiment that the way this went down just feels a little bit strange, right? And I'm not the only one to comment on that. So my point in all this
I
is that
don't
I
think
think
anybody sees differently on that. I've yet to see somebody who's like, yeah, that's just all on the up and up. I was speaking with Eric Tice previously, and I think my previous background was I was an auditor for Deloitte, and so we had to be independent in fact, of course, but we also had to maintain independence in appearance. And this does not appear independent. Their intentions, everything could be all well and pure behind the scenes, and let's hope that that's the case, but the optics of this are just bad. Like, it's impossible to say otherwise.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the frustrating thing for me personally and for other team owners is that the fact that this came in essentially in the 25th hour of the day, right? We had a deadline that had been communicated, and now you have a league altering trade with extreme playoff implications, right? Now you have a team that will likely end up in probably the 4 to 6 seed range going into the playoffs. A team that on paper, had they been utilizing this current roster for the entire season, is probably a top 3 team, no matter how you slice it. And so when you think about what the matchups are going to look like going into that playoff environment, it alters the seeding and the playoff route in a way that probably isn't fair to some of the teams that made roster changes at the beginning of the season or throughout the season. And there's additional layers of this that I won't go into. I think what this boils down to is it's the optics of the process that people are a
Right.
bit frustrated around. And I want to be clear, and I said this in my tweet. I'm one of the biggest believers in MLP that there is. I think the upside potential of this league and our sport is arguably the biggest from a multiple perspective of any pro league right now when you look at the growth of pickleball. But for our league to accomplish its goals and reach the levels that I think it can reach, there's a level of seriousness that we need to echo and reflect both inside of the league, and we need to reflect that seriousness in an outward presence. And we have to make sure that we're doing things by the books and we're not changing things in the 11th hour of the day.
Certainly. It's gotta be you have to develop decent processes right now to be legitimate in that regard, and I think we're in agreement, like, the outcome might be good, the process by which it happened leaves something to be desired, we'll put it that way.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, rather had fun, yeah.